Get out of the car. Officer Daniels barked, his tone a mixture of authority and barely disguised disdain. Malik Simpson's heart pounded in his ears as he fumbled with his keys, eyes locked on the glowering officer. "Sir, what seems to be the problem?" Malik asked evenly, voice controlled despite the adrenaline surging through him. His words echoed in the silence as Daniels stepped closer, the gap between them defined by suspicion and prejudice. "You're driving erratically. I need to see your license and registration," Daniels snapped, ignoring the quiet protest in Malik's eyes. Malik's mind raced. This wasn't about a simple traffic violation. It was a pattern, a ritual of profiling he'd witnessed all too often on these streets. Inside Malik's car, the evidence of a long day was all there: lunch receipts, a few personal books, and a couple of neatly folded business proposals. None of it suggested a criminal, but in an instant, Malik found himself caught in the snare of dehumanizing assumptions. "Officer, I'm not speeding," Malik said, reaching beneath the passenger seat where his briefcase lay. I was on my way to a meeting. I can explain." His words trailed off as Daniels grabbed his arm roughly, hauling him out onto the sidewalk. "Explain when someone like you is causing trouble on my beat?" Daniels muttered, indignation seeping into every syllable. The language was loaded, fractured with years of unresolved anger and personal bias. Malik's pulse raced as he struggled to break free, instinctively, from a lifetime of being treated as less than human. A heartbeat later, a sleek black sedan pulled up behind Daniels' patrol car in a flourish of flashing lights. Out stepped a sharply dressed man, his expression hard yet calm, his presence commanding attention even in the chaos of the roadside confrontation. It was Darren Hayes, Malik's new boss and, as the bystander soon discovered, the owner of the company Malik had just been hired for. Hayes moved with the quiet authority of a man who had built his career on dismantling systemic injustice. "Lieutenant Daniels, please step away," Hayes said firmly, his piercing eyes trained on the officer as if challenging him to question his authority. The unexpected intervention took both Daniels and Malik by surprise. Daniels' face twisted with a mix of fury and disbelief. "This is my jurisdiction, Hayes. And you're just a," Daniels began, but the sentence hung unfinished as Hayes stepped closer, his voice low and measured. "I'm the one hiring Malik Simpson to lead our new community outreach initiative," Hayes interjected, his tone cool and commanding. "I suggest you remember that racial profiling is not just morally bankrupt, it's illegal." The surrounding witnesses murmured as Daniels' hand twitched near his holster. Malik, still trembling, watched the exchange unfold. How had his life, once again, hinged on the confrontation between prejudice and principle? "You're new around here, Hayes," Daniels growled. "But you know as well as I do where loyalties lie. You can't change tradition with a few fancy words." Hayes squared his shoulders. "I can change traditions, by replacing them with fairness, accountability, and justice. Malik Simpson isn't a criminal. He's a brilliant strategist who just happens to be black, and judging him by the color of his skin is not only unprofessional, it's dangerous." Gasps rippled through the gathering crowd. Malik's eyes met Hayes, a silent acknowledgement of the precarious turning point they now shared. In that moment, Malik remembered a time when he'd been full of hope, back when he was a community organizer fighting tirelessly against an oppressive system. The confrontation sharpened all his senses. The heated edges of despair gave way to a renewed determination. Flashback, Malik recalled the countless protests, the weight of placards laden with messages of empowerment, and the moments when angry words were exchanged in dimly lit back rooms. His journey from those gritty streets to this very moment was marked by resilience, and now that resilience was being tested on the pavement under the stern gaze of police authority. "I demand that you return Malik to his vehicle immediately," Hayes stated. "And I want an internal review of your conduct on this call." His voice was steady and unwavering, echoing the promise of a fair trial to those who had been silenced by systemic injustice. Daniels' eyes flashed dangerously. "You're making a mistake," he hissed, trying to reassert control. "You might be his boss, but here, on my patch, I make the calls." Hayes smirked, a smile without humor, born of years of confronting bureaucracy and bias. "Maybe today you are, Daniels, but I have information that might just change your perspective." From his impeccably tailored suit pocket, Hayes retrieved a sleek tablet. With a few deft taps, he displayed images and documents proving Malik's qualifications, and his long-standing contributions to community-driven economic development. "There are records," Hayes continued, his tone sharpening like a scalpel slicing through Daniel's stubborn defiance. "Records that speak louder than your baseless accusations." Daniels faltered under the weight of the evidence. The crowd's buzz grew as whispers spread like wildfire. The very man who had been routinely profiled on this street was now being vindicated by the authority of progress. Malik's cheeks flushed with both indignation and relief. Indignation at the initial attack on his character, and relief that someone was finally recognizing his true worth. As the tension in the air thickened, another voice cut through the murmur, a voice that belonged to a young community activist, Tasha, who had been quietly recording the encounter on her phone. "We've seen this before," she declared. "Step into the circle of onlookers. Too many officers rely on old prejudices. But tonight, evidence speaks for itself." In that instant, Daniel's authority began to crumble. His colleagues, uneasy and caught in the crossfire, murmured in reluctant support for Hayes' intervention. The superior officer, arriving swiftly on the scene in a marked cruiser, took in the unfolding drama. "What's going on here?" the superior demanded. Hayes met his gaze calmly. "It started with a wrongful stop and escalated into an incident of blatant profiling," he reported succinctly. "Malik Simpson is innocent of any offense except the burden of systemic injustice." The superior officer's eyes narrowed as he reviewed the images and documentation on Hayes' tablet. "Officer Daniels, please take Malik back to his vehicle while we conduct an immediate investigation," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. For a long moment, Daniel's expression was a mix of defeat and simmering anger. Reluctantly, he stepped aside, allowing Malik to return to his car. In that brief encounter, Malik's world had flipped. He went from a targeted suspect to a symbol of hope, emblematic of the fight against racial injustice. Later, in the hushed proceedings of a makeshift community court established on that rain-soaked street, Malik recounted his story. The courtroom was informal, a gathering of local leaders, activists, and community members united in their demand for accountability. Tasha's recording had already gone viral, sparking debates and igniting protests that reverberated far beyond that intersection. As Malik spoke, he recounted the repeated injustices he had faced, the bruises that faded slowly, the scars left by words laden with disdain, and the battles fought both on the streets and in the boardroom. "My life isn't defined by your preconceived notions," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "It's defined by the work I do, by the lives I help to rebuild. I'm here not just to survive, but to lead." At that moment, an overlooked piece of evidence emerged. A bystander, who had once been too frightened to speak out, presented a detailed log of Daniel's conduct over the past few months, a ledger of biased stops, documented injuries, and community testimonials. This ledger shattered the smug certainty of the officer. It wasn't just Malik's integrity at stake. It was the future of an entire community that had long suffered under a system steeped in prejudice. Judge Martinez, presiding over the community hearing, leaned forward. "Injustice is not an incident isolated to the actions of one individual, it's a toxin that can infect an entire system. Today, we see before us not one act of misconduct, but a pattern of behavior that must be addressed." The judge's verdict was unambiguous. Dylan Daniels would face an independent review, and Malik would be exonerated of any wrongdoing. More importantly, the judge called for community policing reforms that promised to address decades of bias and neglect. In the aftermath, as Malik stepped out into the soft glow of dawn, he was not met with resignation but with the hopeful smiles of neighbors and newfound allies, activists, community leaders, and even some former skeptics of the police force. Darren Hayes clapped Malik on the shoulder, his hands warm with camaraderie. "Today, you proved that our worth isn't measured by the color of our skin, but by our actions and the integrity of our convictions." Malik's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as he looked back at the scene, a place that had transformed into a battleground for justice, where injustice was met with courage and evidence. He knew the fight was far from over, but this victory was a reminder that one person's stand could ignite change. In the weeks that followed, Malik took on a dual role, a symbol of resistance and a catalyst for reform within the police department. The ledger Daniels had once contributed to was now a document of reform, its pages unsigned by prejudice and filled instead with the promise of accountability. The incident sparked citywide discussions, leading to new training programs for law enforcement and the establishment of community oversight committees, steps toward a system where every citizen's dignity was recognized and protected. That night on the rain-washed pavement, under the pale light of street lamps, a man who had been wronged rose to become a beacon of hope. Malik Simpson, once just a driver on a lonely road, had become the embodiment of justice. A reminder that true leadership emerges when one dares to defy injustice, even in the most harrowing, high-stakes moments. And so, as Malik's story circulated beyond the confines of that roadway, it carried with it a universal truth, that every individual, regardless of background, possesses the strength to challenge wrongs and reshape a broken system, one act of courage at a time. Justice had prevailed on a cold night, but its echo promised to warm the hearts of many, igniting conversations that would reverberate long after the rain had stopped. The early morning light hinted at the promise of a new day as Malik Simpson walked slowly to the community center that had become the hub for voices demanding reform. Though the immediate confrontation had subsided into measured reports and administrative actions, the reverberations of that night were only just beginning to be felt. Inside the austere meeting room of the center, arrangements were underway for a town hall addressing not just the incident, but the broader issue of systemic injustice in law enforcement. Malik sat at a semicircular table with community leaders, activists, legal advocates, and a few policemen who had come forward to acknowledge institutional shortcomings. The atmosphere was a blend of lingering tension and hopeful determination. Tasha, still gripping her phone with a sense of purpose, tapped through replays of the viral video. "We've reached millions already," she said, her voice hushed yet brimming with urgency. "But this isn't about viral fame. It's about creating a permanent change." Her eyes met Malik's with understanding, as if they both knew that recognition was only the first step. The thirst for real reform was far greater. Across the table sat Darren Hayes, his tailored suit now replaced by a more casual blazer as he immersed himself in the community's discussions about accountability. His presence remained a steady anchor throughout the sessions. "Our goal," he argued, "should be to develop protocols that prevent these incidents from happening again. The painful history of this department must be acknowledged if we're to move forward." His gaze drifted to Daniels, who had been reassigned pending investigation, and then to several other officers listening intently. The irony was not lost on anyone. The very individuals tasked with protecting people were now being confronted with the damage their unchecked biases had caused. During a break, Malik found himself approached by someone he never expected, Officer Ramirez, a younger member of the force with a hesitant expression. I'm sorry," Ramirez said softly. "I've seen things like this before, but I never truly understood until tonight. I want to do better." His words, wavering and sincere, opened a door to an even more complex conversation, one that acknowledged that some within the system were also troubled by its conventional failings. Malik recognized the risk of extending grace to those immersed in an unjust system, yet he knew that meaningful change required allies from all corners. "Understanding is the first step towards action," Malik replied cautiously. "We all have a responsibility. But the question is, how do we ensure real accountability?" Ramirez's posture stiffened as if the answer were a weight he'd long carried. I don't have all the answers," he admitted, "but I'm willing to learn." That conversation solidified a transformative idea, bridging the divide between the enforcers and those they policed. In the following weeks, Malik, Darren, and several reform-minded officers spearheaded a campaign for what they termed community-integrated policing. The initiative aimed not only to revise policies and training but to foster direct, authentic interactions between residents and law enforcement that nurtured mutual respect and understanding. One brisk afternoon, Malik stood before a large window of the newly inaugurated community center, gazing at a mural being painted on the exterior wall. The artwork depicted people of all backgrounds, black, white, brown, and every hue in between, woven together in a tapestry that celebrated unity over division. An elderly woman, known in the community simply as Ms. Rivers, approached him. "You come from nothing, and now you represent so much," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've seen you rise, through pain, through the darkness, and now you shine a light for us all." Her words resonated with Malik, the memories of his past struggles merging with this new horizon of hope. Yet even as he took pride in how far he'd come, he remained sharply aware that the battle for systemic change was still unfolding. The mural was one symbol among many, a beacon scrawled on brick and mortar, but true justice required transformation at every level. Policymakers, community norms, and within the hearts and minds of those tempted by prejudice. Back in a crowded session at the center, Malik shared his vision with local activists and civic leaders, laying out proposals for transparent oversight committees and mandatory bias training. "We must start by confronting our own histories," he declared, his voice carrying over the murmurs of agreement. Each of us, whether a neighbor, a police officer, or a policymaker, needs to own our part in this tapestry. It's not about assigning blame, but about healing and rebuilding trust. Darren Hayes, now a persuasive liaison between corporate resources and community needs, unveiled grant proposals and funding plans aimed at supporting restorative justice programs. The funds will empower community-driven initiatives, Darren explained to a group of journalists gathered for a press conference. We're not tearing down the system entirely, but we're forcing it to reflect the values of fairness and accountability. Meanwhile, in an unexpected twist of fate, Danielle's hidden ledger, initially intended to expose the dark underbelly of policing for internal use, became instrumental in the formation of independent investigative units. A whistleblower within the department leaked additional documents that corroborated decades of complaints against systemic biases. The momentum became unstoppable. One evening, Malik found himself in a quiet conversation with Judge Martinez, who had once presided over the informal community court that had swiftly delivered preventive measures against abusive policing. Martinez, a judicial veteran weary of the systemic rot, said quietly, "Malik, you remind me that the law isn't static. It evolves when people like you demand its betterment. But remember, justice is a journey without a final destination. Every step we take must be met with vigilance." Their conversation was interrupted by the toll of alarms as the community center received news of a protest unfolding downtown. A group of citizens, drawn by the fervor of ongoing unrest and a desire for the transformation that Malik championed, had mobilized. Malik's pulse quickened. Protests were a double-edged sword, powerful catalysts for change yet always underscored by the potential for conflict. At the center of the demonstration was a sense of collective urgency. Activists marched alongside sympathetic officers, chanting powerful slogans that called for accountability and a reimagined social contract. The fervor was palpable, a raw energy that pulsed through the streets. Malik joined the front lines with determined stride, his presence a testament to resilience born of personal struggle and hard-won triumph. During the demonstration, Malik was pulled aside by a young man named Jerome, who clutched a handmade sign reading, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Jerome's eyes were fierce yet hopeful, mirroring the countless faces Malik had encountered over the years. "I never thought one person could really change things," Jerome said, voice cracking with admiration. "But today, people like you make me believe that maybe we can." Malik placed a reassuring hand on Jerome's shoulder. "Change starts with each one of us," he replied. "Your voice, your action, even if it seems small, can create ripples that go beyond what you imagine." In a subsequent town hall meeting broadcast via live stream, Malik faced a panel of local officials, community activists, and a few reform-minded officers. The discussion turned heated as long-standing grievances and systemic failures were laid bare. One councilman, entrenched in traditional views, accused the reforms of being overzealous, misguided efforts that undermine law and order. Malik's eyes narrowed as he responded, "Law and order should never come at the cost of justice and human dignity. When every citizen is stripped of their respect, we all lose. My experience, and the evidence we've shown, proves that our system can be reformed without compromising safety. It's time to listen to the community, to trust in accountability beyond the badge." The debate raged on for hours. However, as flashbacks of nearly every injustice were recounted, testimonies of families torn apart by unwarranted brutality, of neighborhoods mistrustful of those who were supposed to protect them, a turning point was reached. Even those previously skeptical began to concede that acknowledging and healing systemic wounds was essential to creating a safer, more just society. Months later, a formal oversight board was established, a hybrid body including community representatives, legal experts, and progressive officers willing to challenge the status quo. Malik's involvement was instrumental in sculpting its mandates. The board was tasked not only with monitoring disciplinary actions but with advising on reforms that bridged gaps between law enforcement and the communities they served. For Malik personally, the legacy of that fateful night had transformed into a broader mission. There were board meetings that stretched late into the night, strategic sessions with city officials, and tireless outreach to community groups. Each passing day was a reminder that the battle against systemic injustice was ever evolving, and that a single victory could spark a series of reforms impacting countless lives. In one particularly gripping board session, Malik reviewed evidence of ongoing practices that mirrored past injustices. A new incident report, a recent case of mistaken profiling, was presented before him. The new data showed that while progress was measurable, the system was still deeply flawed in its treatment of marginalized communities. Malik's voice was raw with emotion as he stated, "This cannot be our legacy. We must enact policies that protect and serve every human being, not just those deemed deserving by archaic standards." The board debated long into the night, and from that intense session emerged a comprehensive reform package. Among its proposals were new protocols for transparent oversight, humane de-escalation practices, and mandatory community review sessions after any use of force incident. The package also called for a reallocation of funding toward education and social services. A recognition that fairness in policing was tightly interwoven with broader social justice issues. As the reforms began rolling out citywide, Malik found solace in the steady rhythm of incremental change. Tasha's viral recordings eventually morphed into a repository of community stories, both of past injustice and emerging hope, that served as educational material for future officers. Officer Ramirez, who had once approached Malik in the wake of the confrontation, became part of an internal training program, sharing his journey from regret to self-improvement with recruits fresh out of the academy. The local media, once fixated on the drama of a wrongful stop and a confrontation on a rain-slicked street, shifted their narrative. Stories appeared highlighting positive outcomes. The now thriving oversight board, the healing of once fractured neighborhoods, and, above all, the visible transformation within the police force. Malik was invited to speak at conferences and universities as a living example of resilience and the transformative power of confronting injustice. One brisk autumn day, Malik visited a school in a nearby neighborhood to speak with young students about civic engagement and the importance of standing up for what's right. In a simple classroom filled with murals of historical icons and dreams of a better society, a little girl raised her hand. "Mr. Simpson," she asked, "are you really a hero?" Malik smiled gently and replied, "I'm not a hero, I'm just someone who loved this community too much to let it suffer." The children's eyes sparkled with clarity, understanding that heroism resided in everyday courage and the willingness to confront hard truths. Years later, Malik's influence had grown to shape not only local policy but also the conversation on policing and reform across the state. The streets that once echoed with sirens and cries of injustice began resonating instead with the hopeful voices of community-led initiatives. The mural outside the community center was repainted with fresh energy and new additions, a tribute to every individual who had dared to challenge an unjust system and work to reform it from within. In quiet moments, Malik would sometimes revisit that rainy evening, the flash of blue lights, the harsh commands, the moment Darren Hayes pulled him back from the brink of despair. Those memories, once painful and searing, had become a beacon illuminating the path toward justice. They reminded him that every step taken in the face of prejudice could pave the way for a future where encapsulating human dignity was not a privilege, but a right. Standing on a modest stage at the annual Community Justice Summit, Malik took a deep breath before addressing an audience of hundreds, community leaders, reform advocates, former law enforcement personnel, and ordinary citizens united in their quest for equality. "The journey toward justice," he began, his voice resonant and clear, "is a continuous path paved by each brave moment where we choose empathy over exclusion, reason over rote bias, and accountability over complacency. Yes, our struggles have been many, and our scars run deep. But it is precisely these scars that remind us of our resilience and our capacity to rebuild." As the room erupted into applause, Malik caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd, Officer Ramirez, whose eyes shone with quiet determination. Malik nodded in acknowledgement, a silent pact passing between two people dedicated to transforming a flawed system into one that truly served its people. The summit was more than a celebration of reforms, it was a promise that the fight for justice, though far from reaching its final destination, would persist with every courageous step taken along the way. In the end, Malik Simpson's story was not confined to a single high-stakes confrontation on a rain-soaked night. It grew into a tapestry of reform, collaboration, and unwavering hope. A testament to the belief that even the most entrenched systems could be reformed through courage, open dialogue, and a relentless commitment to truth. And while challenges still lay ahead, the legacy of that night continued to inspire a community to fight, to dream, and to believe that someday, justice would not merely be an ideal, but a living, breathing reality for everyone. The fight was ongoing, but Malik knew one thing for certain. Every voice raised against injustice, every act of defiance in the face of prejudice, was a building block for a future where fairness and human dignity reigned supreme. Malik stood before the community center one crisp evening, its walls freshly adorned with a mural that told the story of struggles and hopes, a vibrant testament to unity overcoming past injustices. The center, a symbol of a collective journey toward reform, was alive with a palpable sense of renewal. Inside, community members, activists, and even law enforcement officers gathered to commemorate how one moment of reckoning had ignited widespread change. In a hushed atmosphere of reflection, Malik recalled that fateful night when a simple traffic stop spiraled into a confrontation that exposed deep-seated prejudices. That moment, marked by harsh words and the clashing of authority with truth, had morphed into a catalyst for justice. Now, as he looked around at the faces of those who had joined him in the fight, Malik knew their determination was transforming not only the local police department but the entire community. Officer Ramirez, who had approached him with a tentative apology that fateful night, now stood nearby wearing a badge that symbolized his commitment to reform. "I've learned that accountability starts with each of us," Ramirez said softly, addressing a group of young recruits eager to understand the complexities of policing in a diverse community. His words carried the weight of personal change, a reminder that even those once complicit in an unjust system could choose a path of understanding and improvement. At a makeshift podium within the center's main hall, Malik shared his vision for a future where law enforcement and community life intermingled in mutual respect and transparent dialogue. He recounted the painful past and the challenges that still lay ahead. Every misstep, every act of bias had become a critical lesson steering policy changes. "Our fight isn't just about correcting errors," Malik declared, his voice steady with resolve. "It is about building a system where every human being is valued, where justice is not measured by the color of one's skin but by the strength of one's character." Outside, the evening air buzzed with renewed energy as families, neighborhood leaders, and reform advocates mingled under the glow of street lamps. The mural on the center's wall, a collage merging scenes of protest, solidarity, and reconnection, reflected the collective effort to forge a more compassionate community. Children played nearby, their laughter intermingling with the soft rhetoric of determined leaders discussing policy, reform, and hope. As Malik walked along a side corridor, he paused before a glass case displaying a sealed document, the independent review report of the police department. This document, once the fruit of countless community petitions and investigative journalism, had cemented new oversight measures. It detailed not only the misdeeds of individual officers but also a comprehensive plan to overhaul training, accountability, and community interaction. In that report, Malik saw proof that the bitter roots of injustice could yield strong branches of reform. Later that night, at a celebratory gathering held in the center's courtyard, Malik joined Darren Hayes, community elders, and the newly reformed police leadership in toasting to hard-won change. Darren raised his glass and said, "Tonight we honor the courage it took to stand against discrimination and the strength to rebuild a broken system. Together, we have shown that justice is not suddenly granted, it is created, relentlessly, by a unified will." Malik's eyes swept the crowd, feeling a profound sense of closure mingled with the awareness that the journey was only beginning. Even as they celebrated, he knew that vigilance and compassion were required to guard against future transgressions. In that moment, Malik's heart swelled with pride, not for the accolades or for the transformation itself, but for every voice that had joined him in the struggle for human dignity. As the gathering drew to an end, Malik stepped out into the crisp night, pausing to glance back at the building that had been the epicenter of change. He whispered a quiet promise. That he would continue to fight for a society where every individual, regardless of their past or appearance, was offered respect and opportunity. With resolute steps and a spirit unbroken, Malik walked on, into the night, into a future reimagined, and into the hearts of a community determined to keep the flame of justice burning bright.